it's only virtually with all of you guys from the Pacific Fleet. So I followed very carefully the work you've been doing over the years. I'm a huge fan of the knowledge management activities and the challenges that you have there with the fleet. Been down to San Diego many times and toured the ships, and just really grateful for the opportunities to connect and collaborate with you. We've just finished a project actually with Office of Naval Research, and I'll talk a little bit about that, that may be of interest to you. But really what I wanted to do was to try and sort of set a challenge for you guys as you're gathering over the next few days and looking towards knowledge management and what it can do and how it can be used. So I'm going to take you on a little tour, sort of a story of what's happened at NASA and with some of the Department of Defense partners that I've worked with over the years. And then I'm currently on detail to the White House as the evangelist for data.gov, an open government and transparency project. And so I'll tell you a little bit about why that is actually all about knowledge sharing and knowledge management. So what I wanted to do is focus today not so much about sort of the traditional aspects of KM, but really why we are doing knowledge management. So a lot of people are really looking at the fact that we are challenged with doing more with less, particularly within the military and these budget times, and part of that is driving this idea about being more innovative. And of course, our biggest bang for the buck tool is knowledge that will drive innovation the most effectively. So the first slide, and I think this kind of builds, the slide builds there, Todd, is that we know that change is happening. It's happening all over the world, and it's happening in lots of different ways. Ways that are ones that we may not necessarily want it to happen. So there's things like global warming and poverty, starvation. There's war that doesn't necessarily come to a fruitful, peaceful end. And so we're left with this vision of what the world could be. And we as knowledge management professionals are really in a unique opportunity and time to try to make a change in that world, a change in however we want to see that world. So the next slide really shows you some of how that change can be. And it may seem like a pretty big idea, but this is really tangible stuff that we can all affect every day. We can make healthy children and get them access to clean food and water and healthcare. We can make it so that the social networks are ones that are used for common good and for the promotion of democracy. We can use that knowledge to help to build new areas of exploration. And so the world that we choose to be in is really the world that we choose to try and make a difference in each day. So the one thing we know in our lives, the next slide, is really that this change is ahead. And it's a matter of what we want to do in this moment of opportunity with the tools we have and the missions that we have at hand with the fleet and with our other organizations. So the next slide talks about the reason why this is such an interesting time. And it's because we have so many different and distinct generations in the workforce today. So we've always had people, obviously, of different ages in the workforce, but it is only in recent times that there has been such a difference in the way that these people are used to collaborating, are used to connecting, and developing trust. So you all know that you can't build a big knowledge management system and just expect people to come to it. We've tried that and we've failed in the past. What we do know is that if people are collaborating together to support a mission, that they're more likely to be sharing knowledge. And that if they trust each other, they're more likely to share both tacit and explicit knowledge. So how do we build on the fact that we have these different and distinct generations in the workplace? That we have some folks from an older school who are used to sort of building that trust through shared adversity and overcoming challenges, to our younger generation that, if any of you guys have trying to peek there at the faces and see how young people are in the room. So maybe some of you, but maybe for some people my age, it might be your kids, or friends who are younger, and their best friends may not be somebody they've ever actually physically met. Jamie and I have this great, strong connection, and I think we've met each other physically twice. And it was only a couple years into our friendship that we actually met. So, you know, the idea of using social networking and virtual trust is something we have to realize as we start to build our capabilities, that this is part of what is the environment today. And that trust and reciprocity on the next slide is really built on 4 kinds of things. And traditionally this is really simple, but it's important to kind of think about this. One is that personal experience. I know we've met, we have connected, and so there's a trust that we've built over time. It might be that that trust was built through a shared experience, that we both worked on a project together, we both made a big deliverable, we both did volunteer work together, we went to an event together. There can also be a transfer of trust. So you guys don't know me, but you know Jamie, and Jamie's making a recommendation that I might have something interesting to discuss, and so that transfer is keeping you there without walking out of the room for the next few minutes. Or I know that every day, all of you go out and put your lives on the line with people you do not know and who do not work for the same organization. Because I know almost every day you're out driving in traffic. And so we have millions of people all over who trust their lives to total strangers because they have a shared set of values. That those values are we want to all reach our destination as quickly and safely as possible. And so that trust and reciprocity is part of what builds our knowledge management journey. So the next slide is really that we're in this journey somewhere, each of us, is somewhere between the very first knowledge sharing and collaboration system, which is the campfire. The first place we gathered together as a community to discuss shared learnings and how we would make an impact to be a better organization the next day, to hunt better, to gather better, to be able to take care of each other. From that first collaboration tool to the neural implant we all sense is coming. I'm waiting for the Apple version instead of the Microsoft version, so I don't have to reboot to a blue screen each time I have a fault error. But somewhere we have that neural implant where we know we'll be able to tacitly get to all of the advanced knowledge of our society easily. Somewhere between there, we are in this journey. So I'm going to share a little bit about where we've been at NASA on that journey, just to give you a taste of what one organization has done, and then talk a little bit about, sort of at the national level, from President Obama's office, what we're working on with open data and knowledge sharing. So the next slide shows a little screen capture of our NASA portal. So this was our first big knowledge management system at NASA. It's the homepage for the agency at data.gov, and it's gone through a few iterations over time. But when we first brought this up, we had 4 million public-facing web pages back in 2002, and none of them had a consistent message. And so what we did is we started to build an infrastructure that would be able to meet the needs and demands of our missions. Now, you can imagine that there are times when NASA's in the news. Recently, we just launched a spacecraft to Mars this weekend. We're very excited. And there's times when NASA's not in the news. And so on Saturday, on our launch day, we had hundreds of millions of people coming to our website and streaming video over a variety of devices. And then, you know, 2 days later, it's back to normal statistics. So we built an infrastructure that can scale and move with our needs and our missions needs. We built interactivity onto the website. We built knowledge sharing capabilities. And underneath this, we have a whole set of content management systems and metadata standards and taxonomies and all the good KM stuff. But nobody in the public needs to care about that. All they need to know is there's a place to go to get easy access to all of the content at the agency. Now, that helps for our outward-facing version, but we also need to share knowledge internally. So the next slide shows a little screen capture from our NASA Facebook. So this is our internal social media site, Facebook. You get it? So Facebook is the place where people connect and collaborate on sort of general information. These are not necessarily what I'll talk about in a second, our gold communities of practice, but these are places for people to connect, collaborate, to talk about everything from, say, bird watching in Maryland to, you know, how to expedite the acquisition process to were just not what they were interested in using. We evolved our Inside NASA portal, which is sort of a traditional set of links to, you know, everything from policies to cafeteria menus, and we augmented it with Facebook. And we also have, and the next screen shows you how we use this. So this was an example. I was involved in the Chilean miners when they were trapped down in that mine. And NASA was brought in to make some suggestions for the Chilean government to talk about how we could help people who were in remote habitation, because those people were going to be completely remote for 2 months. You know, how do we keep them from, you know, getting crazy and having problems with limited diet and lack of sunshine? And so we have a lot of experience with that, as does your submariners. And so we had a conversation on Facebook about that, and we're able to bring people into that conversation to be able to connect and collaborate in a very quick way. We didn't have very much time to get these recommendations out, obviously. We also, on the next slide, are more formal in some of our communities. This is a shot from our NASA Engineering Network, which has evolved over the years. This is a place where we bring together 25 core technical communities at the agency. So these are communities related to things like thermal engineering, mechanical, electrical, guidance, navigation, and control. We actually have a project management and a knowledge management community on there too. And these communities have a facilitator from my team that goes and helps to make sure that questions get answered, that the leader of the community is supported, that events get organized. So they work as sort of an executive assistant, if you will, to the community leader. And that community leader is selected by an independent group at NASA that looks across the agency for the expert in each of these 25 disciplines. It's a big deal, it's a big promotion, there's a budget that goes with it. So the community leader has to do lots of things, including granting waivers for variations on procedures and policies and helping troubleshoot problems, but they're also in charge of our online communities. And this is where a lot of questions get answered and a lot of our tacit knowledge is made explicit. So we take the conversations that occur here, and that can be, people can interface to any end through texting, through email, or on the website. So we have a variety of modalities for those different generations. And we're able to start capturing. So it may be that someone has a test anomaly, but they don't know how to resolve it or why it's happening. Somebody could jump in with a link to a document, an answer to the conversation, an answer to the question, or several answers, because sometimes, you know, depending on what kind of a mission you're running, it may not be that there's the right answer. It may be that you have to choose among several answers. So these NASA Engineering Network communities have been a great way for us to gather that explicit knowledge and to start to pull out the tacit knowledge. The next slide shows our PACFLT system. So this is our people, organizations, projects, and skills. And we actually just rolled out this system for the Office of Naval Research, and the Army Research Labs uses this as well, and we're just about to, in March, deploy it for the Air Force. So this system looks at how to find and identify experts. Now, you'd think we know where our experts work, but unfortunately we don't actually always know. So we tried a bunch of different systems to have people put up their profiles and validate those, and we ran into all kinds of weird problems with people overinflating their resumes if they were afraid of layoff or felt that their promotion was in jeopardy. They suddenly became an expert on everything. And then we had people who really were experts underinflating their resumes because they felt that they were really busy, they didn't have time to fill out their profile, they didn't want to get another job because they were already overcommitted. And so the information in the system was not trustworthy. So instead we said, you know, we already know a lot of information about these people. We know what they publish, right? We have documents that they publish. We're really good about publications at NASA. We have their timekeeping records. Everybody's super good about putting their time in so that they can get paid, surprisingly. We have a lot of information related to the worked on, the organization that they're in. We have lots of information about our people, including our contractors, because they're often the ones who co-publish papers or are also submit information. So what we did is we used a set of semantic technologies that pull together these different data sources that are already being maintained at NASA. And the great news is, I don't have to pay for them, because timekeeping is already paid for somewhere else. Publications database is already paid for through a library service. So I don't have to pay for any of that. All I have to pay for is a little tiny thin amount of programming that aggregates these together so that at the top level, I'm able to see, I need an expert in Pearl Harbor who's worked on a certain kind of mission before and has certain other attributes. And I get a list of people, this is great, who have that capability. And at the bottom of the chart is a social network map. So it shows how I'm related to those people. Because chances are, if I was looking for somebody in Pearl Harbor who was doing knowledge management, I'd probably call Jamie. But if she wasn't available, now I'm looking through the system trying to find somebody. So I'm probably trying to access somebody I don't know. So it's really helpful for me to see how I might be connected to these people or who these people might know that I also know. So these are the kinds of things we've done traditionally at NASA. The next slide is really the fact that we've been trying to change that paradigm in the last year or two. So we're really looking at how to redefine that competitive edge. One of my favorite books was written actually in the year I was born, was called The Structure of Scientific Revolution. And it really looks at the paradigm shifts that occur when, as a collective consciousness, as humanity, we make a big fundamental change in our ideas of the world around us. So when we realized that we were not the center of the universe, but in fact we were a small planet sort of orbiting a star in a galaxy, that fundamentally changed our perspective in many different ways, in many different fields. It wasn't just about astronomy, it actually affected all sorts of other things. The same thing was true in huge change shifts in biology and in politics. And so we really want to try to understand where we are in this idea of a paradigm shift in our field of knowledge management. So the next slide just helps to illustrate the idea that we are to look at things in a different perspective, that we have the same challenge in front of us, but it's time to shift our perspective so we see something different. So the question becomes, are we still living on the next slide, or are we still now trying to move to the future? So I'm going to now share very quickly a couple of the more interesting recent things that we've been doing at NASA for knowledge management that have taken these traditional ideas of collaboration and tacit and explicit knowledge and deep processes and very robust infrastructures to trying to take those to a place where people don't need to know to come to us, but that we need to come to them. So the next slide is an example of one of our Facebook pages. And the big shift here is not necessarily being on Facebook. The shift is that we want to take our conversations to where people are congregating. We want NASA to be relevant to people in a way that is part of their daily conversation, rather than, oh wow, there's a shuttle launch, or not anymore, there's spacecraft launch, or there's an astronaut talking, or there's something interesting happening. We want it to be part of what they're talking about with their friends. So we have about 50 Facebook pages at NASA. That might seem like a lot, but it's not. It's because we have different pages for each of our different missions. And each mission has a slightly different personality. Some are sort of the conventionally old engineers, and some are like very hip and fun. Just kind of depends what the outreach people on that project have decided to have sort of as their theme. But the Facebook pages are a great way for people to connect in a really easy way to become part of that conversation. So nobody has to know even that there's a thing called NASA, or that there's a website called data.gov. Instead, they just need to know that a friend has talked to them about, hey, I saw a really cool video, here's what it is. And it's part of what they're talking about. The next slide talks about the videos, in fact. So on YouTube, we have two different channels. We have an educational channel, and then we have a regular outreach channel, because it turns out that YouTube is the second most popular search engine in the world. Now, I would have thought it would have been like, Google, Yahoo, and a couple of others that were all text-based, because I'm a text-based kind of person. But it turns out that people go to video now more and more and more for their primary way of answering a question. So they don't want to have the textual answer, they want to play onto their mobile device and watch podcasts or listen to. So we've actually deployed internet up on this space station. And this is an example from our Mars Phoenix lander. We originally started by saying the Mars Phoenix lander has launched on the way to Mars. But as you know, Twitter only has 140 characters, so we ran out of space pretty quickly. And so Veronica, the person who runs this Twitter account, changed it very quickly to, I launched to Mars, and I just landed on the red planet, and wow, it's really cold here, I'm shivering. So that it was a very anthropomorphic experience. And it turned out that that really attracted people, that they felt it was something, I mean, everybody knows just in talking about what's happening on spacecraft in the first person, but it became a very engaging way of connecting with people. And so our policies for social media at NASA that I helped to write are very permissive. We encourage people in almost every area to be on social media and talk about what they're doing with their job, how exciting it is, why it's such a great place to work. There are a few places, obviously, we encourage people not to do that. Launch mission safety is one, and people who have the command codes for the rocket and a few other places, and also pre-decisional information. So, you know, we don't want necessarily it to get leaked on Twitter first without it going officially through some appropriate channels. But in general, most of our employees enjoy that opportunity. The next slide shows you some shots from Second Life, which is a 3D immersive environment that we use for training purposes and for public outreach. So here in Second Life, this slide shows you that landing of that Phoenix Mars rover. People came from all over the world and came into this space with their avatars and were able to connect and collaborate during the event. People came up and said, wow, this feels like I'm actually on the surface of Mars and that I'm really part of a NASA mission. And you know, that's really a great feeling to be able to connect to people in that way. And it was a shared experience. The people here in Second Life actually had the coolest seats in the house because they were getting everything from mission control. People came in from the project to talk here through their avatars. And we brought in all of the images as well as having the animated spacecraft landing on the surface in front of everybody. The next slide shows the fact that we're also, again, making sure that we listen to people. So much of knowledge management ends up getting focused on capturing knowledge and broadcasting it, but you really need to listen to folks. So every Tuesday afternoon in Second Life, we have an open meeting, and we allow anybody to come to talk about anything they want about the agency. Sometimes this can be really exciting and unnerving because you never know who's going to show up and what they're going to talk about. So you have to kind of be prepared for everything. But it's a very interesting place. And we find that on the next slide that sometimes people are more able to understand complex issues when we have them experience it as if they were there. So we talk about climate change a lot at NASA. And I say things to people like, oh, there's going to be 3 degrees of global warming. And they don't really think that's important. But it's dramatic. It's going to completely change the face of the planet. And they think I'm crazy. So we talk about this in text, and we show pictures, and we try to show some videos. But here in Second Life, we have an area where people can go up to exhibits and, you know, manipulate different kinds of things. But on the next slide, what we do is we say, and you live, you know, on the shores of Kauai or Maui or on Honolulu, this is what your home will look like with 3 degrees of global warming. Because what happens, of course, is that the polar ice melts and the seas rise. And the impact is not the degrees of temperature in the air, but the effect it has on the entire biosphere. So when people take their avatar and walk into their living room here, it's a completely different learning experience. And I've watched people gasp as they've done this because they finally understand what it is and why, what it is we're trying to convey. So we find that it's really useful to be able to do this kind of stuff with our knowledge management program. We also want to empower our citizens to become scientists. Everybody should be
Some of those are just educational and outreach, some are geared for kids at different grade levels, but we have a growing number of games that make citizen scientists. So this is when we get too much data from a mission and we don't have enough money to actually process it all. So we decided to go ahead and recruit volunteers. So they go through a little online game training, and then they help us identify features on the surface of Mars. So we have over 500,000 images of the Mars surface uploaded into the commercial public cloud and behind the scenes. And people go in and they identify craters and canals and landing areas, potential landing areas, and all sorts of stuff. Now, any individual may, of course, make an error, but the fact is we have 2 million people who have played this game. And as you aggregate the results, it's very accurate as to what the surface features are and what the planet is starting to look like. And the next slide just shows you an example of how we then render that planet. This is in Second Life, so people can actually walk across the surface of Mars themselves. So that's part of what we've been doing at NASA to try to start really taking knowledge management from a fundamental sort of document management, process-driven approach to one that brings people together into communities to solve challenges and problems and innovate together, to one that takes that innovation out to the public and brings the public into the agency that they're paying for themselves. The next slide really talks about the fact that this whole aspect has been changing so dramatically, certainly since the advent of the internet, but just in the last couple of years, where YouTube is now the second largest search engine. 1.5 million pieces of content shared daily on Facebook. Huge amount of potential for people to want to share. We see the behavior is evident. How do we capitalize on that as knowledge management professionals? And of course the fact that mobile devices are really the place where things are at. So how do we make sure we're getting all of the information out through a multitude of devices and environments? So what I want to do is kind of say from a national level how this has started to broadcast. So the next slide talks about the fact that President Bush initially created an open government initiative under his administration, which was continued under President Obama. And this really is to encourage transparency in government. We want to be able to make sure that people can see what's happening. Transparency encourages good behavior. It also allows people to come and make suggestions about how to improve government or what they would like to see different in government. And we also want to make sure that we're able to collaborate by providing that transparency, that people outside of the government have a better chance of helping innovate and connect and coordinate. And the idea behind this on the next slide is really creating a data ecosystem. So what we're trying to do is gather data from lots of different agencies. And we've got 185 government agencies currently participating in data.gov, which is a lot. I mean, I've been in the government for 27 years, and I'm still surprised by some agencies that I didn't even realize were there. So I'm always delighted to hear from unexpected agencies with data. We try to connect the community along topical interest lines. So it's not just about having 400,000 data sets, which we do, of federal data, but to try to connect those along areas of law and health and energy and oceans. And we provide infrastructure built on standards for people to connect and collaborate. And we encourage technology developers to come in and use that data to create interesting visualizations and applications that take the data and put it into the hands of American citizens every day. I'll tell you about a couple of those applications. This Saturday, we're actually expecting to see a bunch more. Saturday is International Open Data Hack Day. We have 45 cities from across the world participating and looking at open government data, not just from the U.S., but from all over, to try to focus for a day on how to use that to drive data out into the hands of citizens everywhere. So this data is being used in ways that help a truck driver in Omaha or a housekeeper in Seattle or a school teacher in Chicago to be able to make better decisions for their families and better decisions for their businesses. So the next slide is really just a quick overview. Data.gov is this open government flagship project for the administration. We provide over 400,000 data sets across the government, and we include contributions from others others that are connected, like the United Nations and the World Bank. And we try to drive innovation not just within the U.S., but and we also have traditional search. People are able to find this data, and then on the next slide, create visualizations right there on the data site. So it used to be that people would have to download the data, and it still is, but you can download the data, import it into your own data service, it could be Excel or anything else, and be able to then manipulate that, find the data, make a visualization. However, we've changed our infrastructure, so now people can go right away and say, well, what I'm interested in is finding, hospital in the area around Knoweldge. And so I want to see those on a map. And with 2 clicks, you can get all of the hospital data displayed on a map. Or you can have it displayed by ratings of those hospitals on a bar chart or a graph. Or just subset of the data by doing a specific search. And all of that can be done right in the site without anybody having to download anything or know any specifics about programming. And it just makes it a lot simpler for people to be able to use that data. The next slide is really kind of a hint to some of the underlying technologies we're using. So again, we're strong advocates for semantic technologies and early adopters of some of the standards that come out of the W3C. I chair a group for the W3C on e-government with participants from all over the world that look at the standards for both the policies by which governments are sharing data. We just had a face-to-face meeting recently, and it was very interesting. We had the representatives from Russia, China, Spain, France, the UK, and the US sitting at the table talking about the use of social media by and for the government. And it was a very diverse conversation, I'll just say, but very, very respectful, interesting. So we have groups that we're working with outside, our standards bodies that help us to understand what kind of data standards are emergent. And we also work on an open source platform. We're using Drupal today. And in about an hour, we're releasing the first bit of code for a new open source project for with the government of India to be able to have anybody be able to bring up an open data platform. And so the next slide just reaches to the point that it's not all about really sort of sophisticated things. Part of this is really reaching the kids. So we have a site there called Learn that's really about lesson plans for teachers, information for students, access to examples of how teachers are using data.gov in the classroom. Because we realize that a lot of kids graduate from high school not really understanding statistics, not understanding what data means, not understanding how to interpret what a reporter says to them, and or something that they see in the news. We want them to be able to be better informed citizens. And so part of this trying to reach those young generations to be able to help them and their teachers to understand some of these complex issues. But the real issue, and what we started talking about today, was about innovation, right? And that releasing data is going to do any good. Why do we think that it's going to cause innovation to occur? Well, we know it will, because we've seen it happen in the past. So that next slide talks about open data for the economy. And we've seen this twice in big ways. One is when the Air Force first decided to release some data that they were using for their own collection and safety purposes, which is global position satellite. So I'm sure that every one of you in that room has at least one GPS-enabled device on them. And if you have a GPS-enabled device, you probably have a ton of applications on it that are also GPS-enabled. So the release, when the Air Force released this service, they thought that, maybe some mariners would be using it, some people to do, asset management. They didn't really think, have any idea the impact that GPS would have as an established, reliable service and the innovation and the economic boom that would grant. We also saw this happen when NOAA released weather data. So they, for known purposes, of course, gather and publish weather data, but when they released it in reusable formats that others can do, we saw all kinds of new weather services come up. Everything from large services like weather.com to little tiny micro-economies. So I've spoken to developers in places like Nebraska who have used the weather service for very specific farmers reports so that they can, and so these are small businesses, maybe what it comes together most people find is with communities. So we kind of harken back to the work we did at NASA, thinking about those communities and innovation, getting questions answered. And we have communities, so I built out communities on data.gov. As I mentioned, I'm currently on data, so I've moved over for a couple of years to data.gov to help with their huge tasks and the challenge that they're facing. And so I built out these communities along the areas of everything from disaster management, like when the Gulf disaster happened and we had to build up, restore the Gulf, to health, law, energy, education, and next week we are rolling out one near and dear to your hearts probably called Oceans. Ocean is actually focused on coastal and marine spatial planning. So I'll be giving y'all a call to see if there's any data sets from the data that we want to continue to put up there. So let me talk about how these communities end up helping people. I mean, how do we really get this data into people's hands? Well, so the next slide talks a little bit about what we do when an emergency happens. Now, there's some great systems out, and the Chief of Naval Operations actually is heavily involved in, obviously, response to things like Haiti and emergency operations. And I've supported him in looking at issues, connecting across A10 and external social networks to make sure that we can get supplies and people and support in moments of disaster. But when we look at things like the Japanese tsunami and the earthquake that happened, what we did is as that happened, there was a lot of lack of information and misinformation because people just didn't know what impact there was. So you all there in Hawaii, I live in California, and we saw this big old radiation cloud, or we heard about this big old radiation cloud coming across the Pacific towards us, and a lot of people were really concerned, and people didn't have information. Well, it turns out that the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Interior both run a set of capabilities of monitoring for both tsunamis, and those sensors have long been deployed along the coast of America, and also for radiation monitoring. So we just released those data sets in really easy to consume ways with quick visualization. So you can basically, the 2 days after the radiation concern started, we released an application that lets you put in your zip code and see what the radiation levels were in your neighborhood today, yesterday, last year, 2 years ago. So you could see whether or not there was an issue. And you had a chance to see real data. Which really comes to play on the next slide with our health community. So when we think about knowledge management, there's really sort of no more specific, no more personal issue than health. So on health.data.gov, this is led by Todd Park, who's the Chief Technology Officer at Health and Human Services. And we bring together challenges that help to drive people to create some of the applications you'll hear about. Applications, forums where people can have open discussion, blogs where people can talk about something specifically. And in that community, on the next slide, we really push hard to bring innovators into the discussion. So we work with outside organizations, industry, big pharmaceuticals, we work with drug distribution companies like Walgreens and CVS, and we work with health companies like Aetna and Anthem, Blue Cross, Kaiser and Cigna, so that we're able to bring the people who also care about deploying information for people to make better health decisions. We want to provide the data, but we want others to help be the innovators. So what we found is in our first year with this community, we've had 139 new applications that have been developed, 50 new business startups that have been documented, and are hiring people. So sometimes those are augmentations to big companies, like Kaiser starting, or Walgreens starting a new venture, and sometimes those are brand new small companies. And we've seen thousands of lives improved every day. So the next slide shows you kind of specifically, and I think a really tangible way, how this happens. So this is a great little app that somebody developed in response to one of these challenges. And this is called Asthmopolis. Kind of a mouthful, but it's related to asthma. So if you guys know of anybody with asthma, or have asthma, or God forbid have a child with asthma, you know that it's a completely frightening illness because you are unable to breathe, and people have to carry these inhalers around. So this company has a brilliant idea. Doctor, you recommend you might want to use this device. 2 weeks after you start using it, you come back to the doctor, and what you get is a map that shows all places that you've had attacks, because those attacks are predominantly triggered by environmental factors. Dust, pollution, irritants, allergies. And once you know where you're having problems or where your child is having problems, you can start to take action. So we looked at the statistics in the first 6 months of this deployment and people using these inhalers. And at the beginning, the people who were using the inhalers on this pilot had 65% of them had daily incidences of asthma attacks. 65% of people could not breathe at some point to the extent that they had to use an intervention. At the end of the study, 6 months, the only thing that changed was knowledge. We gave them knowledge about where these attacks were occurring. They could do whatever they wanted with that knowledge. Some of them chose to avoid those areas. Some of them chose to work with local governments to look at zoning ordinances. Some of them chose to, make complaints about construction sites that weren't being watered down or changed their yard, right? 6 months later, 25% of people had daily attacks of asthma. Huge, huge difference in productivity, quality of life, security, just peace of mind for parents when their kids are out playing. All of this was just knowledge. We then aggregate that information together for local communities and give it to them so that they can make better decisions about zoning and what they want to do to help make interventions. The next slide just shows other kinds of applications like this. iTriage is on a mobile phone, lets you easily get a quick diagnosis of some symptoms you might be having, and then find a local doctor. So if you're traveling and you don't know the area, you can find a doctor who has a specialty for specifically what you're suffering from, or call 911 or find out what's going on with your symptoms. The next one actually looks interestingly at the idea that we want to change early behaviors as well. So people took a challenge put out by First Lady Michelle Obama around her issue with childhood obesity. And so a couple of the apps that came back in relation to that challenge were one called Eat Your Vegetables, which looked at obesity levels by community. So you can see at the top, there's some red dots and green dots. And the green dots are good places where there's low obesity, and red dots where there's higher obesity. Now we matched that up with another application that's called a food desert. The food deserts are where even in America we don't have easy access to healthy food in some places. So this also happens in inner cities where you have fast food places and maybe like corner liquor stores, but you don't have supermarkets or farmers markets or places that have healthy fruit and vegetables. And so we have this bizarre incident of food desert. So next little graphic below, you can see where there's a set of red dots in the middle of the city. That's actually Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. So you can make the correlation that there's this high obesity level on Capitol Hill in the one application to a food desert in the next application. And so people can start to make informed choices. And what you can see is that there's some big green dots at the bottom, and those are where people are starting to bring in farmers markets so that they can start to have some other choices. And so I'm going to skip ahead a couple of slides, but the idea here is really that on slide 41 that we have real outcomes giving people better lives. We try to pull together data from all of these different agencies, partly just to pull it out and make it available and transparent, and part of it is so that we can actually try to ease the burden on people who are trying to make a decision by showing them applications that range from the ones I showed you today about health to ones that show you where job market opportunities are, where there might be Superfund cleanup sites, so there might be a public safety issue, crime statistics, issues related to the environment, issues related to alternative energy. So all of these are things that we're trying to look at how we can push data, encourage developers, and then watch the innovation happen. And the outcomes of these are everything from people having the GPS devices for Osmopolis to other companies that are looking at those aggregated results. And there's a group in California called Leaf that goes in and plants trees in areas that there are particularly high asthma incidences. So we started really small on the next slide with only 47 data sets, which was, I thought, rather
sparky of us to go out with such a small number, but the point was to get something up. We now have grown over 400,000 data sets. We have countries from all over the world now also putting up open data sites. We have capabilities for semantic technology and search and a variety of things going on as well. So the next few slides just look briefly at our energy community, which is really focused on driving innovation across industry. So this community is looking at federal, state, and local data as well, and looking at the innovations that industry is needing. So right now we're working on a green button project. The green button lets you, California is the first state that will be using this, and it's finding information for consumers of alternate choices for energy consumption, of what's going on in your home and how best to manage your own energy needs, and looking at other alternatives. So we're trying to do a lot of things where we spark ideas and spark challenges. So if we skip ahead to the slide that says the path ahead, what we're trying to do is bring this data up and out of the government to the public. Because just like at NASA, when you're trying to share knowledge, the most important thing is to start putting some facts up there. Get that explicit knowledge, and we've all started this before, right? Get the explicit knowledge up, and then start to help to spark the connection of the tacit knowledge and the evocation of that tacit knowledge in areas that are innovative and drive to your mission success. We've provided really simple ways to visualize that data, and we're trying to connect with small businesses, industry, and other governments around the world to really start to look at global issues related to things like climate, education, health, food, poverty. The next slide really is the latest call from President Obama. So he launched a U.S. Open Government Action Plan in September at the General Assembly meeting of the United Nations. And it's really about contributing data.gov as a platform for global good. So as I said, today we'll be releasing the first code on the US and India project that's talking about data.gov as a platform for all people. This is something that anybody in any city or government around the world can download and modify in a way that makes sense to them, but also using standards that let us all connect and aggregate information that might transcend national boundaries. We're doubling up the number of communities on data.gov. Things like manufacturing, research and development, education, human rights are coming up soon. And then NASA's going to be launching an international space apps competition looking at space data. So the next slide shows all of the cities and states that have come up since we started our launch in the last 2 years and now have open data sites. I don't see Hawaii yet with an open data site, but you guys stole our leader, Sunny Bagwalia, who's now the CIO for the state of Hawaii. So I'm pretty darn sure you guys will have an open data site momentarily. And the next slide shows the governments around the world that have opened up data. And you can imagine some of the normal players here, like the UK and Australia and Canada, Spain and France and Italy, but Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, Taiwan and Hong Kong and Kenya and Morocco have also launched open data sites. So we're seeing that with the transparency is coming real change, that people are able to actually get insight into their governments, to be able to use the knowledge that we all have collected to change for the social good. So the call to action is really, let's work together to set data free, to share the knowledge, and to help transform the world into the one we want to see. So thanks very much. Are there any questions?
We're going to give everybody the opportunity to ask questions. Please stand to identify yourself and where you're from with your question. PR, sir.
Give me 20 seconds. I'm going to start the recording over again. Well, if you want to ask, go ahead. Your question will get cut short. 10 seconds. 3, 2, 1.
United States PACOM as a knowledge manager. You had mentioned at your time at NASA of the communities you had and all the internal type of social media that you had set up. In terms of putting it, for us who are fiscally constrained, how much resources did that really take you? Because we at PACOM are realizing that the unclassified information sharing is going to be something we're really going to have to address, especially with, you had mentioned the Fukushima, the tsunami, which we call the Operation Tomodachi. So can you go ahead and just give us a dose of reality on how much resource intensive, because we realize that we normally work on the unclassified side or on the classified side, but we'll quickly have to merge over to the unclassified side to be able to accommodate all the social media and all the information out there. But we just don't currently have all the resources. So can you just give us kind of an order of magnitude on either costs or resources that it took you to manage and monitor and filter these communities?
Sure, that's a great question. So I think, we've heard about knowledge management systems in the past that have cost a lot of money. I've never been able to get that kind of a budget. So what I'm able to do is, like, the NASA Engineering Network is probably our biggest project of any one project, and we have a budget on that of $1.2 million a year. But that's 25 communities. It's a ton of different things. It's a lessons learned system in the back. So that's a big system for us. We are also, we just rolled out a system for the Office of Naval Research called the PORT, a collaborative system that also has the underlying piece for the expertise locator. And that one was a system that cost $400,000. So the systems that we're talking about are, we're talking about 1 or 2 people in general for a system. Sometimes it's a partial person. For data.gov, we have 5 people. That's all. For all of that work and all of those communities. So you can do some of this by building off of other capabilities, finding the infrastructure to build off of, and really looking at where your very thin resources are going to make the biggest impact. So I was just actually in a meeting with the one of the joint commands today, talking about some of the work we're doing with the Air Force and trying to expand that into the joint commands. And for that, it's really about what we do. What we get a lot of bang for our buck is working off the enterprise architecture and some of the other baselining experience, baselining work that's being done at each of the commands. And some of that, you'd also asked about classified. So for the Navy and the Air Force, that work is also working, we have to work across the NIFR and CIFR nets to be able, in the public web, to be able to, share information appropriately across all of those at the right space.
Yeah, Jeanne, Dennis Schultz with Tax Record Pack in San Diego. Quick question for you. You talked about a lot of Web 2.0 and things like that, very impressive. Can you address NASA's older school KM initiatives that are probably still being done, like retrospects and exit interviews and some of that, non-tool type KM that I think you still do? Capturing the tacit knowledge of your engineers as they depart, things like that.
Yeah, so that's always the trick. In fact, I was just talking to somebody yesterday about that specific thing, trying to capture the tacit knowledge of the folks departing. So we had that sort of in spades recently because we decommissioned our shuttle fleet, and so all of those shuttle engineers were, a lot of them had already been moved out to contractor facilities, and then therefore, as contractors, they were simply let go. We did try to transition some of those people to, like, the Missile Defense Agency and a few other places that had, similar kinds of capabilities. But what we found over the years is that no matter how advanced technologies get, it's really difficult to take somebody in their last few months of time on a project or on a rotation, like particularly for you guys, because everybody's rotating so fastly through on their 3-year rotations, and try to capture their knowledge. I'm going to sit you down and you're going to tell me everything you know about your position. It's really hard to do. So instead what we did is with, like, the NASA Engineering Network, we've transitioned to this idea of wanting to capture the conversations as they occur. So what we do is we insert knowledge management capabilities, or facilitators, because it's not all about technology, but we insert knowledge management into that conversation space so that it's in process. So we don't have to worry that, you know, Matt Landano is about to retire as the chief engineer, that we're not completely crazed about it, because we know that we've captured the last 4 years of Matt's conversations online because he leads one of our communities, or that we know that you know, all the artifacts that he's published are captured in our document management system, because that's the only place he publishes to, because that's the policy and procedure. So we have a much more comfortable place, because we looked at where the most mission critical places were, points of intersection, and then we inserted a knowledge management system, service, capability, process into that place.
Good morning, Jeanne. My name is Mark, and I'm part of Jamie's PACFLT KM team. And I was just curious, something we often struggle with is a definition or a formal definition of KM. And I was wondering, do you or NASA have a formal definition of KM? And if you do, can you share that with us?
Yeah, we do have a formal definition of KM. I think everybody references it a few times and then they move on, you know. But it's important because it does set the tone. So it's getting the right information to the right people at the right time. Everyone's got that part. But it's also to measurably improve the performance of NASA and its partners. So the important thing is the idea that we want to include metrics. I know it's kind of onerous and people don't really, some people think that you can't put metrics around knowledge management, but I think that you need to, and they have to be meaningful metrics. And the idea is it's NASA and its partners, because it's not really about whether or not NASA, I mean, you guys listen, a ton of the work that we do is out through contractors. And so if we're not helping, you know, in our case, the Boeings and the Booz Allens and the Aerojets and the Northrop Grumman succeed, then, you know, if they fail, we're going to fail. So we want our partners to get as much benefit from these systems and capabilities as we can. And all of that stuff is up on our website at km.nasa.gov. So we have a whole bunch of strategy papers and stuff like that.
Good morning, Jeanne. My name is Darlene Shaw from the Space and Naval Warfare Command Center in San Diego. And I saw a couple years at APQC conference, NASA was using virtual environments to do meetings like mentoring between like new employees and older employees. And I'm just curious, what type of mentoring that you're doing today in NASA, and what type of technologies and tools?
Actually, the question was a little faint. Was the question about what kind of technologies are we using for virtual engineering, like virtual worlds?
Yes, virtual worlds where you might be using them in a mentoring sense.
So we've done a fair amount of work. I mean, I've been personally involved in the work with Second Life and a couple of other worlds like Wonderland, to look at how we might use some of these technologies for doing both outreach and real work at NASA. So Second Life, you know, I don't really want to like advocate for one company or another, and that marketplace is currently in a lot of flux and changing. So I'm just going to say that that was a product that we've been using. I think the reason we chose it was inexpensive, and there were some other federal agencies there. It has a large user population of 15 million people, but it's not about Second Life. It's about the idea of virtual worlds. So what we did that experimentation because we wanted to understand the evolution of the web. Stick with me on this one. The web as we know it today is not what it was 5 years ago, and it's not where it's going to be 5 years ago. I'm actually more interested in what is the web going to be like, 10 or 15 years from now. Because I'm trying to architect systems, as the earlier guy asked, we don't have any money either. So I want a system that's not just going to last for a year, but it's going to last for 5 or 10 years. And if I'm doing that kind of architecture, I need to know that the web's not going to be a text-based point-and-click environment. It's going to be, voice-activated? It's going to be a three-dimensional immersive world? Is it going to be a persistent world? Is it avatar-driven? Is it gesture-driven? A lot of research in some of these edgy technologies. To Starwood Hotel chain uses Second Life to put up room designs. And then they have people walk through so that they can say, oh, well, you know, when I see those colors together, I don't like them. Or that bed looks funny to me, or the light switches are too low. Things that they can design in a heartbeat in Second Life and change. That, you know, if they were doing a mock-up of a room or designing a room physically, would be expensive. We did the same thing when we designed our, we have a new center at JPL, which is on Earth Science, and we wanted it to be really interesting, lots of interactive designs and interactive exhibits, but it's also primarily like a conference meeting room collaboration space. So we designed all of that in Second Life, and we compared it to a quote we got from one of our regular construction companies to what they would cost for creating the drafts and mock-ups. And the administrator at JPL did a head-to-head competition. And it became clear in about 20 minutes the complete difference and the benefits of doing things in a virtual world. Because the traditional designer said, okay, well, I'll take your changes. You know, here's my design. And when they looked through it on a two-dimensional piece of paper. And they said, okay, well, these are the changes we'd want. And they said, okay, we'll take your changes and we'll see you in 2 weeks. On the Second Life, they actually walked in to the virtual avatar environment. I mean, their avatar walked into the environment. And they saw everything as it would look. And when they asked for a change, Charlie, our designer, made it right then. And so at the end of, you know, a half-an-hour session, one person was ready to walk away with red lines off of two-dimensional drawings, and then the other one, the person said, this is the room, build it. So the ability to do engineering in that kind of an environment, even though the tools are still a little crude, is going to be amazing.
Hi, Jeanne. It's Jamie, and it's time for us to wrap up your question and answer session. But I just wanted to say thank you again from PACFLT for allowing us to take a little bit of your time. Just so you guys know, Jeanne has been traveling literally all over the world for the past several months now, I think. And anytime I talk to her, she's either in between airports or at an airport or about to get on a plane. So her time is extremely valuable, and we appreciate it very much. And I owe you a couple of things I need to send to you from PACFLT to you. So thanks, Jeanne, very much.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend. Go Navy.
Thanks, Jeanne.